everybody. I got Chris Butler today with me. Thank you for joining me today, Chris. What's the topic you brought? I think it's sovereign. Is it sovereign AI or sovereign cloud first? Which one are we covering first?
I think it's really sovereign cloud because if you want to do AI, you're really dependent on having a sovereign cloud as a foundation.
That's a good point. So what are the kind of core pillars of sovereign cloud then?
Well, if we look back a couple of years, people often think of GDPR, like data sovereignty, as a foundation for what they would say sovereign cloud is. But today, the geopolitical tension that's in the world and the investment that's coming from AI means that there's a lot of changes that are happening. We see countries around the globe really investing in AI, and what that means is people want to be able to capture some of that value inside of different nations or inside of the EU as an example. And sovereign cloud really is the question of how much do I want to control my digital destiny, and therefore what do I want to build versus what do I want to rely on, multinational hyperscalers or software partners as well.
So when I think then about sovereignty, do I need to think about owning my own switches and routers, network cables, software stack, hypervisors, workloads? Where does it start and where does it end?
Well, the way that I often break it down is into kind of four components. The first one is data sovereignty, which we just discussed. The second one, where a lot of people focus, is operational sovereignty. Where are the people who are running my switches and running my routers and my hardware, or who is supplying fuel to my data center? The third one is technical sovereignty, like who builds my software solution, and that's really a lot of where Red Hat plays. But I think one of the most important ones is how do I measure that sovereignty, which we call assurance sovereignty. How do I make sure that everything in the supply chain is what I expect it to be?
Can I then actually build anything sovereign without being or using open source?
Well, I think open source is really that ultimate risk mitigator. When we think about sovereign, the reality is no one can build everything themselves. It's always been true in IT. You always depend on vendors. It's always a risk-based decision as to what you're going to do. When you say, how does open source play? Really what open source is open source is the community saying, this is something that you don't need to build, that all of us can take shared risk on, and you don't need to build it yourself. So you can use that to save money, to be much more effective and strategic about where your business is invested in making something sovereign.
Okay, so that makes sense. In terms of then AI as a workload, I see AI and open source AI really the cornerstone, but then from a model perspective, it'll be open data, right? That is the foundation for really open source AI and the open source models. So we have a construct called the model openness framework, which kind of goes through all the different aspects of a model, what's open and what's disclosed, like the model architecture, the code to train it, the data. So there's a lot of open source washing I found in the last few months that I've witnessed. But in terms of how would you describe them from a sovereign perspective, how to use and construct your AI infrastructure?
Well, I think the extreme case is we want to build our own AI hardware. And you see even open source initiatives around that, such as RISC-V. I think in terms of AI washing, much like software, it's about what do I want to measure and what is important to me. So you might not care about the model architecture. You might be quite happy reusing something. But if you want it to be, if it's in a tightly regulated boundary, you might want to have certainty around what the model input was, what the questions which we use to constrain it, how am I testing it. Now, that's where you have to kind of think about how open do you want it. And I really would say that sovereignty, in the end, is how much of that digital future you want under your control. It doesn't have to be everything. So in some use cases, if it's just scanning a document, you might be quite happy reusing something which was in the upstream community. If it's a really tightly regulated use case, you might want to start from scratch, and there's places in between. I think it's really use case dependent. It's not decouplable from the business problem that you're trying to solve with AI.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, that means there is a bit of a continuum that I can navigate my organization along in terms of readiness, in terms of sovereignty.
I think absolutely, and you kind of asked about the modeled cards. You see similar things in terms of the software itself which is used. So obviously there were open source licenses with different license cards, but then we also have things like the OpenSSF, which is security scoring the open source project. So with AI, you'll have data and code coupled together. So you have to think about the code side of the libraries used to build it, but also who was building it and that input data set that was used to build AI. And that is a continuum that we see here globally.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. It's been awesome spending some time with you, and thanks for sharing your insights and your knowledge about sovereignty, sovereign cloud, and sovereign AI.
Thanks,
Thank you.